Okay, so you almost survived the first day. Yes, it was not very convincing, and this yes, so just almost, almost survived, almost yes. So last session of the day. So you see, as we said this morning, different things. So we started with the AI view, then this new workshop. That, by the way, is the first time that we deliver, so we'll be happy to hear your feedback. This workshop that you just did is the first time, because in the past we were doing another activity, the climate fresk, we did for several years, and this year we said that it was the need to do something a little bit more action-oriented and new and refreshing. So thank you to Aurelien, because he has coordinated and proposed and organized these new initiatives.
I would say also thanks to Pierre Perretou. So
Yeah,
I don't know if he's in the room right now. He'll probably arrive in a few minutes. But actually, Pierre, the workshop was designed by Pierre Perretou, who happens to be an affiliate professor here at ESCP, working a lot on energy topics. So you may see him again also during your executive MBA program.
Great. And now we have this last session, because it's just the last of the day, but it's not less important, about maybe connecting a lot of dots, right? And so giving this view between geopolitics, sustainability, and supply chain, a lot of topics interconnected to change the perspective. Again, I provoke a little bit, and I said, if you leave today, you should leave with more questions than answer. It's good. So I hope that also this session will raise a lot of input to reflect. So thank you very much, Aurelien, and thank you for these final sessions.
Thank you very much.
Then after the session, as you know, short break, not that much. Then we have to take the bus. At 7:30, we have to leave for the bus for the boat cruise. Okay? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So hello, everyone. So super happy first to see many known faces, because some of you attended the sustainability class that we had in November. Also, I animated one of the workshops this afternoon. So it's a long day for you, but it's a long day for me too. I'm also super happy to be here with you for all those who are just starting the Executive MBA program, because I think it's a really important moment in your professional and personal life. And so it's also the occasion for us and for me to share messages that I think are really important for you. So I'm aware of the privilege that I have to spend this hour with you. And for that also, I want to thank Francesco, because you've been a constant promoter of this topic and this importance of integrating sustainability and articulating it with management. So you have the chance to be in a program where I think we're really both ambitious and sincere about this topic. And we owe that a lot to people like Francesco. So thank you very much for that. And maybe you thank him after the session. I don't know. You will tell me. It depends on how you react on it. So actually, what I will try to do is when every year, I design a new masterclass. So it's also a good moment for me to reflect on the year. And this year also with the willingness to take a little bit of step back from the workshop that you just did and really continue this reflection about how geopolitics and businesses and sustainability become completely intertwined in today's world. And I think also it's a good input in your induction program. So basically, that's the questions that we're going to cover in the next hour. And maybe just to start with, let's put ourselves in a different history than the one we're in. Imagine that, so you see here, it's a Sleeping Beauty, right? And she's been sleeping until the 16th of January, 2026. And she wakes up and she asks Philippe, so what has been the big thing in 2025? What would you answer? The same as Philippe. Well, you remember it. It's certain Donald. Yeah, maybe, but okay. So maybe some of you may tell, well, actually, the big thing in 2025 was the Pet Expo in Bucharest, with the winning dog that is like a bit unexpected, a bit postmodern. So that's definitely the big news in 2025, right? Okay, but apart from that, maybe if I ask you, that would be a kind of combination of this different stuff. So where would you start from? So according to you, what would be the big thing? You're telling me, yeah, geopolitics. So that would be the first one that comes to mind. So political and geopolitical dynamics. I think here you all have in mind the growing geopolitical tensions between China, US, Russia. We can mention also the war in Gaza, of course. And the idea that we have kind of stepped in another world, geopolitically wise, like multilateralism, that was the cornerstone of international relationships since the Second World War, is being clearly threatened. And we have this impression also from a political perspective. I think we can mention, just from a national perspective, this rise of populism, which is a very big element. Apart from geopolitics, what else would you say? Yeah, AI, so technological changes on this. So do you know that ChatGPT website is now the fourth most visited website on the planet? A technology that didn't exist 5 years ago. Huh? So here indeed, and AI is raising plenty of other concerns. Economic-wise, what would you say? Actually, it's really interesting that we see this complete change in geopolitics, but from an economic point of view, growth have been declining, but not as much as people could have expected. And actually, if you look at the World Bank, what they say is that the economic growth in 2025 has defied the gloomy expectations. If you look also at the results from very large corporations, they are mostly okay, with some of them performing extremely well. Dividends to shareholders is very strong. So there are still positive elements on the economic side. And of course, but that's maybe from 2024 with the Draghi report, Europe has a kind of a competitiveness problem. So maybe also that will be connected to other elements. Now, what are the other big things? So politics, economic, other elements. Hey guys, some of you have done the strategy class, haven't you? You know the Pestel model? So you mentioned, yeah, also on the environmental front. Yeah. So actually ecology, we see just huge materialization of ecological crisis. So I just skipped through the slides in 2-second mode on the previous slide, but clearly there have been huge ecological crises materializing. Can you cite me one of them? Yeah, so floods in Europe, for example. So here you're thinking about Valencia, I think, and fires with Palisades fires in the US. Okay, and then also what we must say is that we're in this period where most states tend to scale down on ecological ambitions. And Europe in particular. That's a very big shift for us. What is happening in Europe about scaling down ecological ambitions? Omnibus and CSRD, and then also the ban on classic engines that was planned to happen in 2035 and it is not now postponed. So actually we have plenty of signs saying that the ecological transition is like technology. Indeed, AI is booming. Clearly, AI is everywhere. And by the way, we could have a full discussion on the ecological impact of AI, not only on the ecological impact, but also on the cognitive impacts, which is a question that we deal a lot with Joseph. And actually, we are reflecting on how AI generates energy-related pollution, but also what we call epistemic pollution, so how it may pollute our knowledge ecosystem. But that's another story for another moment if you're interested. And lastly, sociopolitics, I think we must also acknowledge that we are in a situation where there is huge polarization within the society, where discussion exchanges is getting more and more complex, including on ecological topics. That's also related maybe to AI, but the rise of post-truth. So this idea that truth no longer is a criteria for people when they communicate. We're beyond that, you know. For us academics, I can tell you that's kind of a breaking point. And yeah, this question of growing inequalities. And we'll reflect a little bit what these inequalities apply to the economic world as well, maybe corporations. Okay, I leave that for you to think about. Okay, so that's the answer of Philippe to Sleeping Beauty. And now next question from Sleeping Beauty. And how do you feel for 2026? And so that's my way of saying have a good year to everyone. But what will 2026 look like according to you? Will it, the first personal feeling from you? I'm super interested to know about that. So who would vote for, who would be in the scary team for 2026 here? Who would be in the excitement opportunity team? Super interesting. It's a bit half and half split. But that's really, really interesting for me to know, and I think also for Francesco at the beginning of this EMBA process. Would you say that 2026 is difficult to predict or easy to predict? So for the difficult to predict, please raise your hand. So here I see a lot of excitement, but difficulty to predict in the room. And the one who thinks that it's rather easy to predict? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so interesting. And last question about how you perceive the year to come. How is it going to be for corporate sustainability? Who in the room think that corporations will invest less in the coming year? So here again, I see a clear majority. And who thinks that corporations will invest more? I see quite a bit of you still. Okay, but that's interesting to see how you perceive the coming year. And I think it's also material for food for thought for yourself for the next step of the week. Actually, when you're a bit lost and in a situation where it's difficult to predict, what we said during the workshop is that you have to do some prospective scenario, foresight thinking. And actually here, when preparing this masterclass with you, I came back to a work that I did with my colleague Valentina Carbon back in 2020 during the COVID. And actually, we wrote an impact paper trying to say, okay, what does COVID tell us about the new era we are in? And so our connection with natural dimensions, including zoonoses and this type of issues. And how can we project ourselves on the future for natural resources and corporations? And what we draw in this impact paper, that I can send it to you if you want. First scenario saying that for us, unfortunately, it was the most likely one. But here we said actually what we are going to see is that the willingness to continue to create value as we did in the pre-COVID world. But of course, since we are confronted with scarcity and limits of resources, we will see emergence of tensions and rush for resources at different levels. And the second scenario that we were trying to show was that maybe there would be another way, which would be maybe a moral also importance and obligation for managers to try to find ways to land in the Anthropocene. How to land in the Anthropocene, and that involves strategies related to resilience, sufficiency, so deciding to consume less on some elements, and also trying to govern collectively and preserve collectively natural commons. Well, of course, I think you can imagine that scenario 2 was maybe not the most likely. And actually here, there is a recent work that I would like to share with you. So it's a French work, but it's very insightful on what's going on today at the geopolitical level. And it's the work from Arnaud Haurin. Arnaud Haurin is an historian, an economist, and he has been publishing this book very lately, a few months ago, called Le Monde Confisqué, Essai sur le capitalisme de la finitude. So I will try to offer a translation of the main concepts. But here, what he explains in his book is that he uses historian lens to say, okay, actually, today we have this view that capitalism is about liberalism. And that's a very specific moment in history, right? Actually, liberal capitalism is to exist has to have different criteria. First, have competition as a main driver, have free trade and free maritime trade. But to do that, you have to organize free trade. And mostly it's the moment when you have one hegemonic force that organize the trade collectively. And the horizon of this is peace. And in France, you have a liberal economist called talking about le doux commerce. So, you know, capitalism as a way to bring peace instead of conflict. But actually, this is one configuration that is not stable over history. And what Arnaud Haurin explains is that actually over time, you had different cycles of capitalism where you have moments where capitalism goes with economic liberalism and moments where capitalism goes with what he calls finite world. And where in this situation, it's a lot more about how do you get access and how do you secure access to rare resources. In this situation, actually, free maritime trade or free trade, because it's not only maritime today, of course, it's radically impeded and it's being organized according to rival poles. These rival poles are most of the time organized by states, where you will have actually a very strong collaboration or relationship, close relationship between the military and the commercial. Secondly, also, there is very weakened competition. Competition is not, in this type of moment, the key element to organize trade and to organize capitalism. What you want, instead of competition, is power. So typically, you have no free price, no free market, you have more traded price and zones, and you accept to have monopolies and cartels because that's the way to organize competition. Third element is that actually the logic is imperialistic, of course. And what is really interesting is that there is very strong relationship, intimate relationship between the political and the very notion of private corporation does not have many sense in this context, right? So actually you would have corporations that are very often state-owned or very close with political power that will help in the appropriation of natural resources through, for example, land grabbing, land ownership, or grabbing of key infrastructure. Today, we could transpose that to the space, for example. Space grabbing is something that excites a lot many people in the Silicon Valley, and they are very close to political power. And last but not least, companies are fundamentally different than described in a usual economics class. They are completely hybrid between the market and the state. And we could talk about quasi-state corporations, right? And I think that this book, just showing these moments of time when you see this kind of reorchestration of capitalism, is really interesting because it says, first, it says a lot about where we're heading right now, right? And also that it's not at all the disappearance of capitalism, but it's a profound reconfiguration that may deeply impact the corporations. So, still there is something really new in the contemporary era, which deals with ecological changes. And what we are going to discuss is how ecology has become a very profound, very deep geopolitical topic. And I'm going just to do that very simply through different examples. The first element that I want to to develop with you is how climate change and resource scarcity, so typically the topics that we've been discussing this afternoon, exacerbate geopolitical tensions. It doesn't mean that it completely shapes, that it's the only cause of geopolitical tensions, don't get me wrong, but it's one of the major amplifiers for it. A few examples about this. Do you know that painting? I guess you don't. But it's called Coach Under the Storm. And actually, this painting represents kind of a panic that happens. And here you see like how brutal the storm is. A panic that happens in 1788 on the 13th of July. So 1 year and 1 day after, something happened in Paris, near Bastille. And actually here, the French Revolution was completely amplified by natural resources constraints. And actually, the year 1788 was a year of very poor yields because of extreme drought. And actually, the preceding years were very heterogeneous. But you had extreme drought, and in the middle of July, you had this like crazy storm that was really absolutely historic, that ruined more than 1,000 cities or villages that was in the road between Bordeaux and Belgium. And actually, the king coach got killed because the king was out that day. He was caught by the storm, and the coach was killed by the storm. So it was extremely violent. And actually, of course, because both the combination of the extreme drought plus this natural catastrophe, actually the farming yields went very, very low. And that generated a lot of social anger. And so here you have an historian called Emmanuel Leroy-Ladurie, who wrote an history of climate since 1000. And what he says is that the cartridge political and social problems was in the gun. So there were problems, of course, lingering across the countries. And all that was missing was to pull the trigger, and that trigger was the long drought of 1788. So I think being in France, etc., it's a good illustration of how this type of topics may generate instabilities. Now, if you transfer that to the present, I'm sure you follow the news and you see that in Iran, the situation is not super great in terms of internal stability, right? You have a lot of protest. We have difficulty in accessing the information about this protest. But then actually we see a very similar pattern. Actually here, Iran faces its worst drought in 6 decades. And actually in November 2025, there was official communication saying that if rain doesn't fall, the country may have to evacuate Tehran. Tehran is 14 million inhabitants. And actually, during that year, you had, before the protests that we talk about now, you had many protests about water scarcity because people couldn't access to electricity or water for several days during different parts of the countries. And so here, for example, you have this is coming from Wikipedia, but examples of slogans during this movement of protest. But these protests were already very significant, and we can see also today how this scarcity in resources may destabilize geopolitical blocks. Maybe in your group during Rupture, you've been discussing the case of semiconductor industry in Taiwan. That's a really super interesting case. First, because it involves business, but actually for Taiwan, semiconductor industry is absolutely strategic, of course, because 90%, it's a very big source of revenue and strategic positioning, right? 90% today of very high-end semiconductors come from Taiwan. and a significant share of the total production of semiconductors as well comes from Taiwan. However, producing semiconductors requires enormous amount of water and energy. Unfortunately, in Taiwan, you have neither of those. Especially when you are in a drought year, where it's a small island, so you have very, very few natural water, and also you import 98% of your energy from the outside. And so here, the situation is very difficult today for Taiwan because they have this problem of shortage in water, but also China taking opportunity of the situation to say, okay, actually, we know where to hit if we want to destabilize Taiwan. And it's crazy to say also that the decision to invest in some places that are very dependent on some resources are not at all driven by a reasoning on, is it possible from a resource point of view or not? Somehow you have other rationales, such as fiscal rationale, strategic rationales, etc. So people tend to evacuate these elements until it jumps at your face. You know that this story of a chip shortage is actually like a huge business risk. Huh? Because here in 2022, so after the COVID, the shortage, there was a calculation from Allianz saying that just for the European auto sector, the missing chips cost 100 billion euros. So, and of course, I'm not going to develop this last example because I think that we're just in the midst of it. And also they would, it would take time to explore both cases, but we also in the front of Venezuela and Greenland right now. And here it seems that Donald Trump has understood also what it means, like capitalism under finite resources and this kind of imperialist logic, right? So here, the first side that I wanted to show is that resource constraints and climate change actually exacerbate geopolitical tensions. But the other way around, you have also huge issue related to geopolitical tensions that retroact on resource constraints and climate change. Example number one. If you master some resources that are absolutely important for the ecological transition, you have a very strong power in today's world. The example for this is countries that control rare metal supply. So here you have a book from Guillaume Pitron, who wrote this book in 2018. So it's not like yesterday that we discovered that we have a dependency with rare earth mineral. And actually, so you had already first tensions around 2016, 17, 18. And it continues, of course, because like here you see on 7th of June 2025, you had like this huge threat on all the industrial actors who use rare earth minerals on the Chinese bans because of escalating tensions between Trump and China. And China is saying, okay, you want to play the game of tariffs? Let's play it. And actually here, the International Energy Agency wrote different reports on how big the risk was for, again, the automotive industry, but also plenty of different actors. Here they said, with new exports control on critical minerals, supply concentration risk become reality. So they say we're just at the edge of a situation where many industry will be just forced to stop because of impossibility to access to minerals. Where does that come from? So here you can see in this graph the battery supply chain, so the electric battery supply chain, midstream and downstream, and who controls what. So here you see on lithium, for example, how like 75% is being controlled by China. Here nickel, copper, and here all the other elements. And on batteries, here, battery cells, you see how 80% of the market comes from China. So the moment you get really unfriendly with China, your sustainability transition may be a little bit at risk. And here again, it's on rare earth minerals and the permanent magnet production. And so here you see how mining is like vastly concentrated also in China and a few other countries. And when it comes to refining and magnet remanufacturing, then the control of China is near 90%. So what the International Energy Agency said is like in the short term, if export approvals for company are delayed, the international market may face very tight supplies of battery materials. Well, you know the continuation of the story. It's just a live example from the Rupture case, somehow. So what could be the answer? Actually, I think with that in mind, you understand also that it's a very difficult situation for European automotive manufacturers, right? And so actually the debate that you just mentioned at the beginning, like the ban on 2035 of classic engines, is just a battle for survival for many European automotive manufacturers who don't control the upstream, right? So there is a very strong tendency from the position of someone who doesn't master these resources to say, okay, let's stop the transition. So there are two problems with that. The first one is, of course, that if you slow down the transition, then you may find yourself in a much more difficult situation on the initial problem, which is climate change. So that's the obvious first one. The second one is also that some other countries will not pose. And so that's what Volvo says in Europe, saying, actually, we are just shooting a bullet in our foot because actually we are just opening a huge market for Chinese manufacturers by doing that. The irony of that is that some people criticize Volvo for what? For being maybe in a very weird situation to say that Europe should maintain it because Volvo is the capital of Volvo is now Chinese. And so actually it also shows how through shareholding you may have very complex geopolitical issues involved in this kind of political situations and positions. Okay, so you see that it goes both round, right? And now the question is, okay, is the trend there to stay or not? And from a sustainability position, I would say, unfortunately, I think the trend is here to stay. Scarcity. So here I just take an example from Rystad Energy. So it's an intelligence company in the field of energy based in Norway. And they done a publication in 24th of July 2024 saying, okay, how can we forecast future oil availability? You may know that conventional oil is considered to have passed peak oil according to International Agency of Energy. And Rystad, they say that a more realistic outlook for oil production total output would peak in 2030 at 108 million and decline to 55 million in 2050. Now, if you just consider our strategic autonomy with oil in Europe, you realize also how just saying, okay, stop the transition is really shooting ourselves a bullet in the feet. Because if you don't produce, of course, you will be the last to be served. And in any way, the economic cost to it will grow very, very high. Another example that was brought to my attention by Pierre, who now came in the room, is this communication. It's October 2023. And here it's like the main copper producer in the world, explaining how they anticipate a very big problem in a mismatch between production and demand, offer and demand. And what they say that we are going to need to require a huge quantities of copper for decarbonization. But actually, the prospects of having more copper in the coming years is not very bright because the most productive mines have already been mined. So what's left is the the ground with less density of copper. And also for acceptability reasons, it's very difficult to develop new mines. And so basically what they say is that until 2025, 2026, it's pretty much okay. But then they estimate that we enter into a situation where there is a structural shortage in copper production worldwide. Climate change, is it here to stay? Well, here, if you read the pre-reading that I asked you to read, you may have understood that since it's a bathtub problem and it's not a flow problem, but it is a stock problem, before we reach carbon neutrality, the climate will increase. And frankly, reaching carbon neutrality, we're not there yet. And so actually here, if you've read carefully the pre-reading that I sent you, you've understood that this is actually both a joke and not a joke, right? Homer Simpson, well, he's the optimistic guy at least, huh? But, so Bart saying, this is the hottest summer of my life, and Homer's telling him, yeah, but if you view that from a positive angle, it's the coldest summer for the rest of your life. And so here, also, this is a graph that we had during the session, showing that actually, if I asked it with my group, but who bets that we will manage to contain climate change by really transforming it? Today, it's a difficult bet to make. And so actually, also on climate change, it would be a bit unsafe to say that this will disappear. Today also, but this is something that you may have discussed, already with the current level of climate change, there is a growing issue, and as students in an executive MBA, I think you should all read about this. There is already a problem of insurability, right? So if you live in California, the ability to insure your own assets for fire is near impossible. So this is a debate we had with my group in terms of scenario planning. What does it take to have a company that no longer can rely on insurance? It's a big question, no? And I really recommend you to read this essay, Is the Future Insurable? From very great sources that is called Probable Futures. But anyway, you have the slides, and if you're interested, you can have a look. So now, I would like to conclude just this presentation about reflecting on the implications both for corporations and for you. And here on that approach, so of course, corporations are in the middle of this turmoil. And I think that we have to view corporations a bit like this, These are boats that are going to be shaken by the storm, and some of the storm will be very hard to predict somehow. So here, what is really important first is to mention that corporations won't be equal about that problem. And I think we need to differentiate what I would call traditional companies. And for traditional companies, the big issue is that you will need to learn to cope with geopolitical risks and climate and resource risks. And actually, we talk a lot about sovereignty at the political level, the state level today. But I think that notion should be directly applied to corporations. Actually, the big question is, how do you restore your strategic sovereignty in this new world that we're entering in? How do you anticipate on future risks? And how do you manage them? Through which mechanisms? And I will point to concrete stuff that you can explore. At the other end of the spectrum, you have a new type of corporations. And these are state-like corporations. So corporations where it becomes really increasingly difficult to say whether they are public or private, whether they are political or business. And I think the best incarnation of that, for the best or the worst, I don't know, I'll let you judge on this, but it's Elon Musk, of course. Because if you think about Elon Musk today, the boundary between a company like the one that Musk owns and the state is incredibly thin. Elon Musk can decide who has access to internet in a conflict zone. That was said explicitly during the first moment of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, right? He decides to open his Starlink information access to some people and to restrict to others. So you have a key element also about mastering information through media such as Twitter X, right? You have huge, so you may master communication and information. You may also be able to have your own crypto money. Until a recent period, money was a clear prerogative of the state, right? So here, these state-like corporations have a central stake in geopolitical issues. And here we could also go on with Musk saying that he has just officially taken on political roles by reforming the US state. And so they have very clear role to the state and they have state-like prerogatives. And so these companies will have also a very, very central role in shaping the future geopolitical conflicts. You may be in between those two types of corporations, but I think it's very, very important to reflect on the fact that what we call the corporation is no longer homogeneous, right? And now I would like to end with a few reflections on your EMBA journey and then open the discussion and the floor for questions. So first, I think that there are a few stuff that you really need to make. Executive MBA are traditionally not being trained on climate topics or biophysical elements on the planet, and that's a problem, right? Because at you can dream of any strategy you want, have a very big leadership vision. At some point, if it's completely off the mark about the geophysical dimensions of our world, you're just deluding yourself. Or maybe as a society, we are deluding ourselves, I don't know. But there is a big biophysical problem in the current way we manage our organizations. What's really super interesting is that there are many organizations that try to tackle the problem. One super interesting read, if you read French, is this report, Paris à 50 degrés. So here it's a mission that was launched by Alexandre Florentin, who actually launched an information mission on Paris authorities, elected people, to grow their awareness of the city vulnerability to extreme heat waves. And basically, it's a super interesting initiative because it's like nearly a year-long process where they invited different experts to really understand how the city infrastructure was going to experience shocks and what you can do about that. You have to do precisely the same within your organization. And interestingly, it's something that we started to do with AXA Climate, a partner with whom we launched a program called Programme Adaptation. And so for a year, we had like 8 big companies working with us. We had like 8 meetings and we organized several workshops and conferences about how organizations create their strategy, their adaptation strategy for climate change. Of course, it involves to develop new competencies. And so here, first message, boost your climate literacy or hire people that are able to connect the biophysical world with your organization. If it's too complex for you, hire someone. And find someone with the double skills, of course, because it's not useful if you have someone that is like a pure physicist in climate, but that has no clue about how the organization functions. You really need to develop expertises that combine both. That's why also we created the class, this fundamental class on sustainability. Of course, we are not training you to be an expert, but at least to raise your awareness. Second element of thought, you will have a strategic class, and I'm not teaching it, so I don't know the content, and I don't want to say anything about the wonderful professors that you will have. But I think that from an outside view, when I read the business press, for example, there are a lot of strategic practices or strategic motto that are clearly out of date if you consider it from a climate point of view. Think about the role of managers. Most of the time, the role of the manager is to say you have to think efficiency and optimization. At the end of the year, I will pay you if you've optimized that and if you have also the KPI to show that to me. Second element, a big motto that emerged in the 80s, 90s, and 2000 is to say, focus on your core business. Build an asset-less company where you outsource and externalize, and you only keep the strategic assets, like the brand, maybe the distribution, because that's connected with the client, and that's good to have. But the rest, it's shitty. It doesn't create any value. Externalize this and optimize this, by the way. The huge issue with both of this is that it creates enormous organizational vulnerability in a time when you have unpleasant surprises in the biological world, right? If you have outsourced everything, you no longer control your supply chain. And if you just focus on efficiency, maybe you over-optimize things that make you vulnerable. Best example about that is the COVID. Remember the COVID situation where, just in the case of France, we discovered that we had no mask. How comes? Because we've optimized mask management. We had unnecessary stocks. So we burnt the mask. I mean, that's true, huh? And that's for optimization reasons. And beds to reanimate people, same story. If you look at the demand over time, we can close reanimation beds. And so the moment when you have like a very unpleasant surprise and you need to move in emergency mode, you no longer can adapt. So here, be careful. Every time you optimize something, every time you make something more efficient, you may also make it more fragile. And so think always, what do I fragilize when I optimize? That's, I think, a very, very key message. Second element, also, there is a big risk in this model of management through KPI and Excel spreadsheets. I'm sure you all know managers that manage an organization with a big Excel spreadsheet and that tend to reduce the complexity of the organization to an Excel spreadsheet. And that's really cool, huh? I mean, I think it does simplify your life as a manager. But at the same time, it creates an incredibly lowered managerial attention to everything that is not visible in the Excel spreadsheet. And typically, weak signals such as competition in uses, etc., they are not visible on an Excel spreadsheet. And so here, pay attention to local conditions, to changing conditions, to stuff that are emergent but not really visible at the moment. And just move out from your office and close the damn Excel at some point, right? So that would be a good recommendation. Although Excel is a very good tool. Also, in terms of corporate governance, also, if I ask managers today about what is a firm, it's a stuff that belongs to the shareholders. So the mission of the managers is to maximize shareholder value. Two problems here. First, it is legally false, but that's a longer story, and it has not always been like that. You know, we had some what we called managerial capitalism for a long time before the transformation of corporate governance. And the problem with short-term financial incentives and this shareholder value maximization culture is that also it creates inherently a bias for short-term, right? And I mean, we cannot blame, if you're in this system, we cannot blame companies to focus on the short term. But here, that means that corporate governance also need to be rethought related to this. And the last element I would like to mention is this philanthropic view of corporate social responsibility, which creates a kind of missing opportunity somehow, because you miss the strategic and risk focus. And I'm deeply convinced that today, the topic that we talk are really fundamentally strategic and fundamentally articulated with risk. So basically, a significant part of the apparatus of strategy is, I think, becoming a bit outdated or unfit with the modern context that we're in. So what should we do to rethink a little bit strategy? So here, a little bit of an agenda that I have to share with you, and then you do whatever you want. You have 1.5 years for your executive MBA, and I hope that in the end, you can say, I've boosted on this and this and this. First element, understand the biophysical world and your organizational vulnerabilities. Second element, do not only focus on optimization, but focus on another topic that is very important in management control. And here I'm speaking under the authority of Francesco. Reconsider efficacy. Efficacy is, are we able to meet the objective? Maybe not in the most efficient way. And by the way, talking about efficacy is somehow questioning the targets themselves. What are the targets? And how do we meet these targets? And in terms of the targets, I think a big question, since the world is going to shake more and more, it's not only going to be about efficiency, but it's also about resilience. Maybe successful companies of tomorrow will be the company that manage to last, simply. Right? A key element, I mentioned outsourcing, and I think that we will go back on this trend to re-internalize some activities. But doing that, you will have to manage a trade-off between exposure, because if you have the assets, you're being exposed. And so maybe it's riskier for you. But then you're maybe less vulnerable if you're clever enough to organize to limit the risk. Today, we have companies that have low exposure because they've externalized everything, but very high vulnerability. Actually, it's a very complex trade-off, and I don't have the answer for that, but I think it's a fundamental paradox or tension that you have to manage. Rethinking corporate governance for longer term horizons, I think that's fairly clear, and maybe some questions will be revolved around that. And move towards a more risk-driven CSR. And so here we have discussions with Joseph as well, where we're saying maybe the R of CSR needs to be rethought, not on corporate social responsibility, but on corporate social reliability, which may actually become a very big social expectations about organizations. So with that in view, I think that there is a last personal tension you may be confronted with. So it's that maybe the big personal question that you have to reflect on is that in this context of scarcity, planetary limits, does my organization actually worsen the situation? And it may be the case, that you're making more robust companies that actually worsen the situation. Oh, crap. But I mean, this type of individual tension, I think, are inevitable. So does it worsen the situation? And the big question, does it serve a general purpose, a higher priority purpose? Does it help the world to adapt to a world that is more constrained in terms of resource and more unstable? And with that in view, I wish you a wonderful EMBA journey and a wonderful 2026 year. And I'm here for the questions now. And for the questions also, I would like to invite you to raise all the questions, but also to say that the animators for the workshop, if you want to at some point complete my answer, I think it's good to have this collective voice as well. And collective, but not the same. Yeah, so there are two questions.
So thank you for your great presentation, very inspirational. We saw the picture with the clear dependency we have on China. Okay, my question is, how did we let all this happening? What happened all these years?
I think it's a very, very good question. What do you think? Well, actually, I would say just one reaction about that. If I was a little bit provocative, I would say that true strategy has disappeared, both from public policy and private policy. Everything has been aspired by short-termism and markets. And so I do think that there is a big issue of who today is really doing some strategy. And that question can be both raised at the level of corporations and also public institutions. And I think that that's a big part of the crisis we're in at the moment. It's like we have an incentive system that doesn't bring people to think long term. And we have also an evolution of our society that brings people to think selfish and not so much on collective interest. Maybe we have to reconsider also how we train people for that. That would be my very subjective answer to you. But what's really super interesting is as well to do some international comparison and to see how strategic, by contrast, some countries are, including China. Yeah, absolutely. And the US being strategic as well in a different way. Yes.
Yes. I have one question about AI because when we speak about the negative consequences, we focus a lot on the environmental aspect. I was at the largest sustainable finance conference this year or last year, and the thesis was actually about the AI, that it democratizes access to knowledge for poor people. So we speak about the second, so about the social impact, and very positive one. And one of the examples was about India, where the farmers locally, not speaking any language, can get access to knowledge. So how would you judge then the impact of AI? Is it can this knowledge access outweigh the environmental impact at some point?
Okay, so it's a very difficult question first, because I don't feel like myself as a I don't want to present myself as a fully legitimate person on AI. So first element in my response is to say it's also a question of personal ethics to say when you feel you have something clever to say on this or not. For me, I can tell you about what I said. I certainly don't have all the elements in mind to answer fully to your question. Of course, I think AI has plenty of good elements, and there are plenty of dimensions that I'm not even aware of that have positive consequences for society. One thing that I know, however, is that one of the worrying trends related to AI is how AI is being used and I'm really fascinated in the way students use it. They use it as a proxy for truth. They raise a question to AI and they have this deep belief that somewhere a God is talking to them and that the tool is intrinsically superior because it gathers all the knowledge available everywhere in the net. So somehow that's a machine for truth. And when you consider how AI is designed, the very problematic stuff is that AI has nothing to care about the concept of truth. AI is providing results that please the user. It's a user-centric tool that provides you with a kind of plausible, legitimate answer, etc. But did you, for example, ask an AI a question and AI says, I don't know? Did you ever have that experience?
It's very convincing, actually.
Be very careful with some tool that never tells you, I don't know. that would be my answer. And then we have plenty of illustration of how AI may be used to generate fake knowledge. Actually, I mentioned this when I talked about epistemic pollution. Actually, this project started when we found a climate skeptic paper that was co-written with Grok. And the paper has everything like the academic look of it, but is published in a journal that is just created to promote climate skeptic papers. So that's the purpose of the journal. Huh? You can say, well, that's very academic. Huh? And it's being legitimized by its author saying, but look, it's being written with Grok, so it's truth. And here, what we say is that we have to be very, very careful about a tool that enacts something as a truth when the tool has no criteria to decide what is the truth or not, right?
Actually, people are now verifying the news using AI on X, so this is very problematic. And I agree with you, of course. And
so what we say with Joseph is that we may be confronted to a situation where today, if you're on the internet or even if you listen music, for example, you may know that on Spotify, 40%, I think I would have to check, but I think it's between 30 and 40% of the songs that were uploaded last year were AI generated. What it means is that actually you're using AI to generate the stuff that populate the internet, that populate the cultural products that you make, etc. If it's based on wrong information or you're creating bullshit with it, what you're creating is the same problem as microplastic pollutions, but for knowledge. So as you can see, I have a complicated relationship with AI. So that was a long story short. Yeah, there are two questions there. Yeah. But maybe there is a lady, and I think that two men raised the first questions. It's important also to... Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, first, thank you very much for very brilliant presentation, very inspiring. So thank you very much. You asked us about our expectations from 2026. What about your expectations? And very connected questions. Just depends on your answer. Do you believe that demand from corporate side will increase or decrease on competence in sustainability and this knowledge? Thank you.
So there are plenty of questions in your question. About my own expectation is, I would say, if you, I mean, the people I deal with, you included, dare to be courageous. And I think we live in a society where we need courage. Last year, the first question that I had, it was the day when I did this presentation, it was the day Donald Trump went back on power in the US. I mean, you can imagine that was symbolically something. And the first question, it was a completely different presentation, but the first question that was raised in the audience was, what gives you hope? And I was like, difficult question. And I think the issue is not hope. The issue is courage. And I think it very deeply. I hope that collectively we can be courageous. And I think that we need the same type of spirit that people that disobeyed during the Second World War. You know, the resistance movement, etc. Not to say that we should publicly disobey, etc., etc. But I think we do need this type of courage. And if we expect optimism, that's maybe not the best start for it, you know? I always feel bad when people say, okay, give me optimism. It's not my job. My job is to give you a sense of the problems as they are being described by academics, etc., and then reflect on how we can try to cope with them responsibly in a situation of management. So that would be for the first question of my hope for 2026. And then your other question was, corporates, will they invest or disinvest? Actually, I think there is a problem in the way company invest, maybe on the topics. I think what I see also is that the root problems that we're discussing here were just at the start. And so basically the message that I tried to share with you is to say that the way we tend to view sustainability, CSR today, etc., may be deeply reframed, and that actually we may see a very deep reframing of the debate for a much more geopolitical and strategic debate in the coming years. If you're in a company that is able to invest resources cleverly on this, there is a good chance that it's successful, in my opinion, in the coming years. That would be my answer to it. But if it continues to invest in classic CSR and sustainability, not so sure. I don't know. Yeah, you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You just mentioned about two things, risk management and crisis management. Professor Venuti this morning explained and reminds us that perma-crisis was a new term from Collins in 2022. And my question is, I don't know, but maybe, I don't know if everyone here, because for me these two concepts, risk management and crisis management, are deeply intertwined, they are linked. We cannot learn one without understanding the other, and vice versa. Do you think that we need to have this kind of knowledge, not as a specificity, but as global interest for ourselves? Thank you.
Yes. No, frankly, I mean, that's really, in a word, the answer is yes. And I mean, I'm fascinated by the fact that it's exactly the type of discussion that we have with corporations that want to plan their adaptation strategy. Basically, one of the big messages that we develop on this program is to say that you have to think about deep organizational transformation. It's not just making an adaptation plan. It's a deep question of organization culture if you want to adapt to climate change risk. And a big source of inspiration for that is very specific types of organization that in organization theory, we call them high reliability organizations. So concrete examples in real life are coming from the military, nuclear power plants, or organizations that operate in naturally very risky environment and that have developed routines, competencies to have a very high level of reliability in a very risky situation. And actually, for us, it's a big source of inspiration to say, okay, actually, we are maybe in a situation where all companies should become high reliability organizations. And it takes for that a culture of risk management, ability to deal with crisis. So that's why I was just saying, in short, the answer is yes for me. Yeah. There is a last one over there from Olivier.
Yes. Hi, I was one of the facilitators today. I love your last slide here. This is talking about common goods, global common goods, what the general purpose of the companies. I think we had two very good examples in the workshop with one meat company and one airline company. And we should ask those questions, what's the courage to transform those companies with those questions here? Do they worsen the situation? Does they serve common good in the current strategic that they have? And what would be the courage to transform them to something else that would meet those purpose?
And I think it's an excellent word for conclusion. So fully agreed. And I think it's interesting also that we did not discuss when we try to debrief and to rethink the strategy of these organizations. We did not really discuss it along these lines. So that's super interesting. And thanks, Olivier, for this comment. And just to conclude, I think it has been a long and intense day. for you and for us as well. But I really hope that we have planted some seeds in your personal journey and reflection. And I know that, so now maybe it's a moment when there is reflection and also a mix of excitement, fear, etc. But then you're going to turn into a crazy cool experience, starting also this evening, because also one thing that we say also with colleagues is that also if it's not fun, it's not sustainable. And so I think that for tonight, think about that when you're this evening, and I can trust Atoll Francesco for the fun part. And so thank you very much to all, and see you very soon.
Great. So thank you very much, Aurelien. Thank you to your team, to the colleagues that supported this afternoon in the facilitation. So we are at the end of this long day. I hope you enjoyed it and you received already some preliminary inputs. So we are now moving to the last part of the night, the boat cruise. So please bring everything. Don't leave anything in this room because it will be cleaned. We will have the buses leaving in 10-15 minutes max. In Rue de Vaugirard. However, we have all the team here outside to guide you. So we will not be just outside the school, but at the big road, Boulevard de Vaugirard, which is the big road over there. So enjoy, see you tonight, enjoy it, and then tomorrow morning we will have the other session, again 8:30 the breakfast, and 9 we try to start on time tomorrow morning at 9 the session, again on AI, artificial intelligence and human intelligence. Great, enjoy the evening, enjoy tonight, thank you very much everybody.